Won how many rings in the NBA?
4.
Will Perdue.
Thank you.
Here is the story that I tell about Will going back into the 80s. When he arrived at Vandy, I didn't think he was a very good player, and for a couple of years he may have well been able to prove that. But if you were Will's friend back then, when he wasn't the superstar that he turned into in his last couple of years at Vandy, you were Will's friend for life, and I have always appreciated that, and I've roped him into being here. And so tell people about the start at Vandy and then kind of how it all started to turn for the good.
Well, one of the things that was...
Aim it like this, it'll go better, yeah.
That's your experience, George.
Oh, yeah.
But one of the things that was advantageous to me back in high school was I was taller than everybody else. I didn't necessarily have the best skill level, but I was a quick learner as far as I was very fortunate in high school. You got to remember, in the state of Florida, it's about football and baseball. But I had a friend that I became a quick friend and had moved down from Virginia, because where I lived in Florida was by the Kennedy Space Center. So I basically was taught to play basketball at the age of 13 by another 13-year-old who had been playing since he was, 5, 6 years old, because up in the state of Virginia, basketball was pretty big there. And he was the one that kind of got me involved. And then, George, as you know, when you're in junior high school is what we had in Florida up till 9th grade. You usually had a teacher who was the basketball coach. He knew a little bit about basketball, but wasn't necessarily the best teacher, but he did the best he could. But he also enjoyed doing the job because he got a stipend along with what he was paid as a teacher. And then at the same time, as I got into high school, the basketball coach was the chemistry teacher, but he also coached JV basketball. But what was advantageous for me, I was very fortunate. There was a gentleman that just had moved down to this area to work at the Cape from the state of Kentucky. And he wanted to help out with basketball, and he just kind of wandered in the gym one day and said, "Hey, do you guys mind if I help?" His last name was Stevens, and he became the guy that taught me how to play basketball. And we started going to basketball camps. Stetson basketball camp in DeLand, Florida. University of Florida basketball camp. Florida State basketball camp. I couldn't get enough. And by going to all these basketball camps, and then the old BC camp in Milledgeville, Georgia, and that's where CM Newton actually saw me for the first time, or actually Coach Clayton saw me for the first time, and started recruiting me. And then when I first started, I was getting recruited by some of the smaller schools, Fordham, Furman, Stetson, still good schools, but not, the SEC schools, the ACC schools, the Big Ten schools. And as I got into my senior year, then Purdue got on board, Georgia Tech got on board, Virginia got on board, Vanderbilt, Florida, the whole thing. And then I was very fortunate that the biggest concern for my parents is we don't care how good you are as a basketball player, we want you to get a good education. So, A, Vanderbilt and what they could provide, B, CM Newton, who my parents really loved. That was a winning combination as far as they were concerned. And Vanderbilt was actually my first visit. And so I compared everything else. I liked it so much, I went to Purdue and I said, well, is this better than Vanderbilt? Nope.
Wait a minute, Purdue University?
Yeah.
Wow, so Will Perdue.
But it was spelled a little different.
Yeah.
But that's okay. I went to Georgia Tech with Bobby Crimmins. And I said, is this better than Vanderbilt? No. I went to Virginia with Terry Hollins, watched Ralph Sampson play his last regular season college game against Maryland and Len Bias. Is this better than Vanderbilt? No. And that's how I made my decision. And it was kind of interesting, you go full circle. I made the trip to Virginia at the same time that Steve Reese, who I ended up playing with Vanderbilt, did. And unbeknownst to me, he also signed at Vanderbilt and is also, like you, been a lifelong friend. And that's kind of how I ended up here. And then once I got here, I was very fortunate that I had a couple coaches, one being John Bostic, then eventually a coach that came from Tennessee State by the name of John Martin, who basically took me under their wing as their son and refused to let me fail. Because academically, I almost did. And it wasn't because I couldn't do the work, but it was the fact that, hey, the first time I'm away from home, I'm in a dorm room with a bunch of guys, and, you know, wiffle ball at 1 in the morning is not conducive to great grades.
So you've actually done this before, this wiffle ball stadium?
Oh, if I get up and walk off, I'm going out there and taking a few pitches.
Okay, I think we need to send you over there in a little while. I want to share with you all something that was really cool, and I got to be a part of it. C.M. Newton was his coach, and he's also, for me, probably the luckiest break I ever had in athletics was meeting him. Because in the early years, he set up a lot of the things that helped me be a Division I play-by-play announcer at an early age. So fast forward all these years later, Will Perdue, C.M. Newton, and me at Pancake Pantry 2 years ago, and the gist of this breakfast is Will wanting to ask questions to Coach Newton like, why didn't you totally run me off? Because academically, Will was like me. He was a screw-up until the pilot light went on and he realized he didn't have any choice. Tell everybody in about a minute or so about that day at Pancake Pantry.
Well, I'm gonna defer to you because you tell a better story. Because I might embellish a little bit, so I want you to tell.
I will embellish.
Just tell the truth. Go ahead.
It was really interesting because Coach Newton came very close to running him off, which is interesting because Will kind of saved Coach Newton's job, if you really get down to it, back in the 80s when things were not going that well. All of a sudden, Will Perdue has this breakout year, and they end up, you know, starting on a string of NCAA tournaments. And I guess Coach Newton's answer was, you can't really run off a 7-footer.
Yeah, I mean, that's, again, height was advantageous. But if you remember, Coach Newton also wrote a book. And he had a chapter in his book about me, and he did this story about how, in the book, he had to give me his best, I'm going to stick with you speech, I'm going to give you one more chance, because I was actually, unbeknownst to a lot of people, was on academic probation.
So was I. Welcome to the club. Mine was my mom. If you got on her probation, it didn't matter what the school did.
Right, but he brought me into his office, sat me down, gave me the 30-minute speech, talked to me about how important grades are, this percentage of athletes that actually make it to the next level. I wasn't even thinking about playing NBA back then. I was just like, Coach, I'm struggling here. I'm trying to do it, but there's a lot of distractions. I'm struggling with my discipline. You know, we got fraternity parties to go to. We got wiffle ball to play at 2 in the morning. I'm doing my best. But he gave me this little talk. I went back to my dorm room. I actually talked to my friends who were one of the reasons why I live in Louisville now. And I said, what do you guys think I should do? And they said, well, you know, we've developed this relationship. We think you should stay. You don't need to transfer. Doesn't necessarily mean life's going to be better for you. Doesn't necessarily mean if you transfer somebody else, you're going to play more. So I said, all right, I'm sticking to it. And CM wrote in his book, and I didn't realize he knew this, but he wrote his book about how he felt good about his speech. I came back to him, told him I was going to stay. You know, things really worked out. Academically, I figured it out.
The speech had nothing to do with it.
The speech had nothing to do with it. It was the fact that my friends said, hey man, we'll stick behind you, we'll help you out, we'll tutor you, we'll do whatever we need to do. That's what friends do.
Now for the younger audience that does not remember Will when he played at Vandy, obviously he went on to great things with the Chicago Bulls, and of course he had some pretty famous teammates, Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. Tell everybody, give everybody a couple of minutes of what being a Bull during that three-ring circus was like.
Well, it's, you know, you think basketball is fairly simple, and at the end of the day it is. But it's the aspects of the game of basketball that you learn that actually make you better. And, you know, it's kind of interesting. I learned from Bill Cartwright, who was at the end of his career, but was still playing, about, hey, let me give you some advice about how to take care of your body, how to eat right. Because he's like, I'm living proof of a guy who didn't necessarily do that. And at the end of his career, he was breaking down. A guy that a lot of people were, you know, Bill Cartwright, on the cover of Sports Illustrated, University of San Francisco, was a very good player, but because of some things that happened physically, because he didn't take care of his body, had a very good career, but could have had a great career. He taught me how to take care of my body. I was very fortunate that I had a veteran player to do that. But probably the couple things that I learned more so was just from being involved with Michael Jordan, not necessarily talking with Michael Jordan, but being involved with him about what it is to really succeed at that level. Because the one thing that made the Bulls so good, but also made Michael so good, was he refused to lose, or he did not accept losing at all. But you don't see many players, if any, that are as good as him, that work as hard as he does. You know, players now, they work hard, don't get me wrong, but this guy, this was a guy, if you saw him work out in the gym or the weight room, you would think that this is a guy that's the 14th, 15th guy that's just, you know, working out to keep his job. But no, he was the best player who wanted to be even better. He didn't look at himself as the best player in the NBA. He looked at himself as a guy that had weaknesses, and he needed to work on those weaknesses. And you're like, man, if he's doing that, I must not be working hard enough. Because as you know, I thought I worked pretty hard.
Sure.
And I thought that helped me be successful, but that even ramped it up to the next level. I mean, our practices were drop-dead slugfest as far as how competitive they were. And I don't want to say the games were easy, but I remember we're sitting in the locker room and we're looking around going, man, thank God we're playing tonight, and we're not playing ourselves, we're playing somebody else. It just seemed that made the games a lot more enjoyable, but it seemed like they were easier. They weren't, but it was the preparation and practice that made it that way.
Years ago, you told me a story about what it was like for Michael Jordan to have to try to go to a theater and see a movie. Tell that story real quick.
Well, the best story for people to truly understand, to be what it's like Michael Jordan, is we used to travel, the first 3 years we traveled commercial like everybody else. So you go to the airport, you get on the plane, you get off the airport, get off the plane, and what's the first thing you do when you get off the plane? You go to the bathroom.
I thought you were going to say go to the bar.
No. George, we have to take care of our bodies.
Oh, I'm sure you do.
So people wouldn't bother him. Michael would always go in the stall and close the door. Well, this one guy, I guess, thought he was being funny, but he was actually being serious. He pulled out a piece of paper and a pen, and he sticks his hand up underneath the door and says, hey, while you're in there, can you sign this for me?